All right, so let's continue on with our button example. Now, right now, if I run this, you can see we have just a very basic window, and inside of it, it has a prompt and all this good stuff. Now, let's say we wanted to disable this button before some other option or command happen. You can do that by just simply pushing enable equals false, and I'll save and run that. And now you can see that my cube button is disabled. All right, so let's take a look at creating some extra parameters, right? So we actually want our button to be true for now, and what we'll do later is once we get all this logic working, we'll make it where you have to enter parameters for our cube to before we can actually be able to create one. So actually, let's do this. Let's add a sphere for now. So let's create a couple variables, right? And so let's do one that's let's create a global variable. And so it's the way you define a global variable. And if you're not sure what a variable is, just think of it as a temporary storage place. And this variable can be used inside of a method. That means it will only be accessed and edited here, or outside of a method. And what that does is, actually, let's go ahead and cut this and go to our top here. And it looks like I'm missing my import line, the import MC. I was just copying it out from here. Let's see if I can grab that. So I don't have to type it out. Let's see. I'll just type it out. All right, and I'm going to save that as well. I'm not sure why I didn't save that out. And I think when you run it up here, it gets rid of that import statement, which is fine. But anyway, so back to what we're saying. So let's say I want to create a global variable that just says object count, and this would be for our sphere. And then I'm going to just select this line, copy it, and paste this down. And this will be object radius. And let's save this out. Now we can create in our show UI method here, we can create a couple more local or a couple more variables. We can define them as global, but like there's no need to because we've already have them here. So we can define a few more variables. So let's say we're going to use object count and object radius. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, like we want to create a field, and inside that field we want to we'll include some stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and inside below our column, because we're going to do it, we're going to create some fields here. And the first field I'm going to create is this object count field. Actually, let's define this as field. All right, so there's our fields. And so for our object count field and our object radius field, what we want to do is we want to essentially create like a field where we can type information. So we're going to do MC dot, and the type of field we want is an integer field. And a good idea of whether or not something worked is if the command turns a different color. So let's go ahead and copy this, and we'll do the same thing for this right here. Now, the difference though is the object count, when we look at it inside of Maya, it's usually a solid number, right? The number that we want to create. So if I go to create, polygon primitive, sphere, you can see the radius here is a decimal value, where some of these other ones are set to integers, right? So if we go to edit and we go to duplicate, special even, you'll see the number of copies is a integer, like a hard number and no decimal value. So, oops. So back in here, what we're going to do is inside this field, we want to define what the minimum value is. So the minimum value of objects I want to create is just 1. And then the minimum value inside of here, that's for the scale, we'll just do 1.0 because they're already spawning in pretty big. I'm going to save that. Let's go ahead and run this. So right off the bat, you can see now we've got this. If I type 5.0, I can't actually add a decimal. But here I can do 5.0. It'll allow me to add a decimal value because it's a float. Oh, you know what? We didn't add this as a float. We did int. So let's just change this to a float. And let's save that and let's rerun this. And now you can see that it gives me that float value, which is kind of cool. All right, I'm going to bring this up a little bit more. We don't necessarily need this right now. Now, below this method, I'm actually just going to copy this define button method just so I have the structure. And I'm going to paste this somewhere down here. And what I'd like to do is inside of this command where I'm creating the button method here, I'd like to tie that. Actually, let's copy this. Actually, I'm going to cut this. And I'm going to rename this button method. I'm going to kind of get rid of it. So this is not just going to create, or we'll leave it as a button method so that it still does it. But it's not just going to be for just having that button method where it enables true, but where we have a visible button. We're going to actually create our sphere and cube objects in here. So this method is going to be used for that. So we'll right off the bat create a cube. And actually we should probably create a couple fields for these, or like labels. So for this, above this one, we're just going to say number you would like to create. And then radius, you would like your spheres to be. Let's test it. You always want to run it after you add something new because just to test that all the code is working. So for example, we moved this down. You can see now we still have a cube that was created here. So I'm going to delete that out. And we've got a bunch of these windows. So let's close that out as well. And let's bring this guy back. All right, let's keep going. Let's make some local variables, right? So one variable that we'd like to make is, I'm just going to hit enter a bunch to kind of give us some room, is we'll make one called number spheres. And this is going to be the number of spheres that we create. And we'll do MC. And then we're going to grab that integer field from before. And we're going to grab this variable here because this is, remember, we're inputting inside of here our object count field. And we're going to write query equals true. Now, what query does is it means that we're getting data. If you put false, or we're setting data by setting this to true. If we set this to false, we're getting the data. I'm sorry, true is getting data, or true is set fit data. Get is we're just pulling the data. That's what querying does. It just wants to know whether or not we're getting or setting data. And then for the value is also true. We are actually accessing value here. And then let's do the same thing for our number of spheres, and then we have a number, and this is just going to be the radius. So sphere radius. And remember before we set this to a float value up top, and we want to grab that, let's see, object radius field here. And same thing. Now, what we'd like to do is we're going to offset the position so we can see it a little better. So let's do this. So we're going to offset the position of the sphere objects as they are created. And so for that, we're going to be using a for loop. So this is a little bit different if you've done for loops before, where you set the integer. We're just doing sort of like a linear for loop. So we're going to do for, and then we come up with some value I in the range, which is the number of spheres that we got here. So like if somebody put in 10 in that field up top, what we're going to do is we're going to create that sphere. So if you guys remember mc.polycube here, well, the command, so actually we can just copy this, mc.polycube, but we're going to change this to sphere, is equal to the radius that was put in, or sphere radius rather. Oh, actually, it's just the radius is a default command by them, and that equals my sphere radius here. So radius just identifies, like if we put in a number here, like we put in 5, it would set all the values of all of them to 5. And remember, we're just getting access to that field here, the sphere radius. Now to move our sphere, all we have to do is just put in MC here and dot move and what we want to move. So we're going to move I being all of the number of spheres in the range. So we're going to say I, so we're going to move it this amount. So I times the radius of our sphere. So that's sphere radius. And then whatever value we want to move it by. So we can multiply it by 3.0. And let's actually wrap this in its own parameter here, because this is the x value. So what we're moving it on is the x value, which is like, so if I select this guy here, you can see there's an x, y, and z. So what we're doing in our script is we're saying we're going to move it on the x-axis, this x-axis here, but we're not going to move it on the y or the z-axis here. And we need to actually put this, let's see. We're actually going to call the showUI method. Let's see, that's this right here. We're actually going to call this at the end of this method after all of this has been created. So let's tab that in and hit enter, and we're going to call that there. Let's save this and hit Control Enter and see if we have errors, which I'm sure we do somewhere. Let's see. All right, let's zoom out a little bit, and let's see, we want to call show UI. Actually, I wonder if we, yeah, let's run it back here. There we go. All right, so here's I put show UI inside of this method, and that's not what we want to do. Okay, I'm going to save this. Now let's give this a shot. So the radius you'd like your spheres to be, well, it's currently set to 1. So let's say we set it to 5, and then the number of spheres we want is 15. And well, I'm going to hit the cube button, but you can see that it created a cube. We never actually created the button to launch off our spheres, which actually we did. We're actually using the same button. Let's take a look at this. We have a button labeled cube command button method. It calls this button method. One thing could be we have just one argument here. If we want multiple arguments, you put an asterisk in the front. So let's try that and see if that works. Let's close this out and rerun it. We do get an error. It says object count field is not defined. Let's see. Here's our object count field. Oh, you know what? I think we need to drop these inside of here as well. The reason is, let's try that again. All right, so what I did that's different, and this is actually a good point to bring in if you're jumping around like I am. So like I record rigging videos, C# videos, and then I jump back into these Python ones. So I'm kind of in rotation. So if you're like me and you're kind of working on multiple projects and things at the same time, this is actually pretty awesome that you pick up on things like this. One thing I didn't realize is even though these variables are global, inside of Python, you have to tell it that you want to reuse these variables inside of each method. So you have to copy these same variables and just place them inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this up a little bit so you have the code. You can kind of take a screenshot and go over it. But notice that I reset these variables at the top of each method to get this working, and then below it. So we really need to comment. I'm going to go through and really comment this code again, but I'm going to save this. I'm going to rerun it. And now you can see our little prompt window appears. And inside of here, say I want to leave them at 1, and I want about 10 spheres. Now I can hit this cube button, and you can see it generated 10 spheres. I can also set this radius to 0.1. Let's see if that works, and then hit cube, and it give me those across the surface. So good stuff. This video is a little bit longer because I wanted to kind of go over all that stuff. I'm going to end this video here where you have a copy of the code to look at.